Hello, I'm Derek Adair. I'm here to speak to you about the Battle of Gettysburg and its importance. Now, just very quickly, it is important because it is the turning point of the Civil War, and it was the bloodiest battle ever fought on American soil. Now, to give you a quick timeline of the war, the war was 4 years long. The South was actually winning the first 3 years if you look at the battles, and was slowly pushing the North up even more north of Washington, D.C., the capital. And after the Battle of Gettysburg, it quickly turned tides, and the South just got destroyed. Now, this all happened because of tension between the North and the South, mainly on the basis of slavery and tariffs. South Carolina secedes, the whole South follows suit, and the war begins. Now, fast forward a bit. Robert E. Lee's general strategy for the war was to actually encircle Washington, D.C., to make it in a position to suffocate Abraham Lincoln. That's because, Gettysburg is actually north of Washington, D.C., and so that's why the battle actually happened. But that town was actually chose thanks to an American spy by the name of Harrison, who worked directly under Robert E. Lee, and thanks to Matthew Lively for writing this account, he was actually a Nashvilleian, I learned. And so this man Harrison chose Gettysburg as the plan to attack, and then on July 1st, 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg begins. Now, if you can see on my visual aid, I know it's really small, this first one, I'm sorry about that. Robert E. Lee had 80,000 men march into Gettysburg, where he was met by Cavalry General Buford, and Buford got smashed because, remember, the whole Southern Army was basically located right south of Gettysburg, while the Union Army knew that there'd be a battle somewhere, but didn't know where. So this initial attack just went terrible for the Union men because they had a very widespread defense because they didn't know where the South was going to attack from. And because of that, Gettysburg went down very quickly. This is the second day of the battle. As you can see, Confederate troops actually are north of the city and got met by the Union reinforcements led by General John Meade. Now, most of the fighting happened on these two hills. This one right here is called Culp's Hill, and this one right here is called Cemetery Hill. They were lined up with cannon artillery, and for that whole day, Robert E. Lee couldn't crack it. So he made a battle line up here north and was met by more Union reinforcements, and that was basically the whole second day of the battle, just seeing which one would crack first. And so that moved on to the third and final day of the battle, where Robert E. Lee decided that he couldn't crack Meade's line, so he located all of his power into one part of that northern line and decided to march his whole army, his whole remaining forces, through a plantation to meet the Union. Now, Meade is actually the first man ever to beat Robert E. Lee in combat. First man, because Lee, 3 consecutive years of just going undefeated in battles, but Meade figured him out. Meade knew exactly where Robert E. Lee would march from and decided to move all his artillery right in that plantation. So Lee had to march his army through that plantation, and they got met very gruesomely with cannon fire. And that was the final day of the war. Not the war, the battle, where 23,049 Union casualties happened, with 3,155 dead and 14,529 wounded, versus the Confederate casualties at 28,063, 3,903 dead, and 18,735 wounded. I'd like to thank the American Battlefield Trust for giving me that statistic. Now, funny enough, the battle would have actually gone on for 4 days, but Confederate supply lines were cut. Now, once again, very shoddy visual aid, but the Confederates were actually marching more reinforcements north, where Custer, not a general at the time, but we all know General Custer if we know some basic history, met the supply lines with a cavalry attack, disrupting the supply lines and ultimately making them have to retreat down south. This is a very key thing because, like I said, that battle would have gone on for 4 days, only increasing the casualties if Custer didn't meet these supply lines. And, that's why this is all very important, because who knows if those supply lines would have made it up there. Who knows? Maybe Robert E. Lee would have won the Battle of Gettysburg, and maybe American history would look a lot different than it does now. And I would like to end this all with a quote from Abraham Lincoln at the Gettysburg Address. This nation underage shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. I think that's important because it showed how the Union Army persevered through this Confederate attack and ultimately turned the tides to win this battle and then soon the war for America, and ultimately making us one step closer to the freedom and equality that was promised to us in the Declaration of Independence. Thank you for your time.